Hello and welcome to CX Today. My name is Charlie and today I'm delighted to be joined by Colin Shaw, founder of Beyond Philosophy and also a prominent CX podcaster and influencer. Colin, it's great to have you join us today. How are you doing?
Great to be on the show, Charlie. Yeah, looking forward to this, yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you today because we're going to be talking about how organizations can create more memorable customer conversations. And before this conversation, I had a quick scour through a recent white paper that you wrote, and it was fascinating. And I've added a link into the description so viewers can check it out. But there was kind of one quote which really stuck in my mind when I read it, and that's, "We do not choose between experiences, we choose between our memory of the experience." So I was wondering maybe if you could expand on that point a little and tell us about the importance of memory in customer experience.
Yeah, you know what, as you know, Charlie, I've been doing this stuff for 20 odd years. But this is probably the biggest thing I've learned personally in the last 10 to 15 years, okay? And the quote that you mentioned is actually not my quote. It's from a Professor Daniel Kahneman. And Professor Daniel Kahneman has won the Nobel Prize for behavioral economics. And behavioral economics is effectively sort of psychology and to do with how psychology and behavior links into money, okay, or to the economy. And here's the really fascinating thing. If you think about customer loyalty is a function of memory, okay? So in other words, if you want a loyal customer, by the very definition of the word loyalty, it means that you've been there before. It means that you've remembered it. So if I said to you, Charlie, let's go to a restaurant, where would you suggest? As soon as I say, where would you suggest, immediately you're thinking back to where to go, okay? Where you've been, you're thinking back to adverts you've seen, you're thinking back to all of those things. So when you stop and think about it, customer loyalty is a function of memory. Now, when I started to look into the whole of this area and started to read up on Kahneman's work, Kahneman talks about this fact that we don't choose between experiences, we choose between the memory of an experience. So what Kahneman's talking about is that we effectively have two selves, okay? We have the experiencing self, which is the listener listening to this session that we're doing now, this very moment, okay? And we have what people remember from that experience, okay? So the listeners listening to this now, and maybe in a week's time, somebody turns around to them and says, "Hey, I gather you was on CX today, and you saw that session with Colin. What was he talking about?" And they may be able to recall what that is, but even in the word recall is thinking about, well, what actually happened. So we have the experiencing self and we have our remembering self. Okay, and that's what Kahneman's talking about. He's talking about the fact that we don't, and when he's saying experiences, he's not talking about customer experiences. I'm just applying it to customer experiences. But we don't choose between an experience, we choose between the memory of an experience. So whenever we start to think about a restaurant, or whenever we start to think about any form of supplier, we think back to the interactions we've had with them. We think back to interactions maybe we've had with our competition. We think back to maybe things that we've heard, seen, that influence that influence what we think. I mean, just think about the word expectation, okay, and think about how an expectation is built. Well, an expectation is built from the experience that you have. It can be built by just, again, what you've read in the media. It can be built by what people tell you, what people articulate to you about, or maybe a friend's had an experience. But again, the key part is you've remembered it. and therefore your expectation is there. It could be there, it could be there, but it's there, and now you're judging that experience based upon that. So the fascinating thing is that customer experience is all about memory, okay? And that for me is really fundamental when you start to think about how do we build a great customer experience that people remember, and that's the key.
Yeah, I think lots of really great stuff in there. Kind of for me as well, like it introduces a new way of thinking about customer loyalty in terms of to create customer loyalty, it's crucial to think about how memories form. What kind of more does the science tell us about that?
Yeah, good question. So that's the next question, which is, okay, so we understand that memories are important. So then the question becomes, well, how do you create a memory? What is it that creates a memory in our mind? And what Kahneman goes on to talk about is that how we remember an experience is through what he calls the peak end rule. Okay, and this is all laid out in the white paper. So I would encourage people to download it and read it as well, and share it in the organisation. So what's the peak end rule? The peak end rule is the peak emotion that you feel in an experience and the end emotion that you feel in an experience. So peak end rule. And that raises again a number of interesting points. Okay, so the peak emotion can be a positive emotion. It can be a negative emotion. So what's the peak and what's the end emotion? So the interesting question that comes from that is 3 or 4 questions that are interesting that come from that. One is, well, where's the peak? Okay, so if we've got a customer journey, then where's the peak emotion that customers are feeling? Do you know? And most organisations don't. What emotion are you feeling? Yeah, at the peak, and clearly the same applies at the end. Yeah, what emotion are you feeling is your customers feeling at the peak? And what emotion do you want them to feel? Okay, and again, in my experience, most organisations have not yet defined the emotions that they're trying to evoke in their customers. Okay, and then the last key question, and this becomes a really important key question, is, well, which emotions drive value for you? So in other words, which emotion will give the organisation the return? So which emotion drives an increase in net promoter score? Which emotion drives an increase in revenue? Which emotions drive an increase in customer spend? Okay, so you have to determine, really, when you're starting this, you have to go, let's do some research to find out which emotions drive value for us, okay? Because now we need to look at our customer journey, identify where the peak is, see what emotions that we're currently evoking. Now, actually, we need to get this emotion here, and we need to make sure the customer's feeling this at that peak emotion and that end emotion. And what Kahneman goes on to talk about is that endings are really, really important. And actually, endings are more important than the peak. So if you're trying to get something right, you've really got to make sure that you get the ending right. Now, the reason I raise that is because the interesting part is that lots of organisations, particularly in call centres environments, just want to get the bloody customer off the call at the end of it, and they're not really concentrating at the end. And what Kahneman talks about is focusing on the end is a key aspect of it. So again, just to summarise, it's called the peak end rule. So where's the peak emotion? What are they feeling? What's the end emotion? What are they feeling?
Yeah, I really love, there's lots of ideas that I really love there, but defining kind of the emotions that drive value is a really interesting concept, and maximizing the power of those emotions at a peak within the experience and at the end of the experience. That's a very interesting methodology, and I think there's something that organizations can definitely follow, kind of in building customer journey maps, looking to add those peaks at certain moments of emotions. But in terms of defining the emotions that drive value, how do you suggest a business goes about doing that?
Yeah, so they have to do some research basically, and for me, it's not the normal research. So the challenge, and when I say not the normal research, what I mean by that is most research that organisations do is based upon correlation. Okay, so in other words, correlating one thing to another. But what we find when you start to talk about emotions is you've got to look for causation. Okay, so what's the cause of things? So in other words, a customer goes onto the website, they can't find something, they're feeling frustrated, and therefore they go off the website. And there are, when we look at that type of research, there are three aspects. There's the activity that the customer's doing, the part of the experience, the emotion that the customer's feeling, and then what drives value. Okay, and the interesting thing here is that what we typically find as you get into this whole behavioural science field is that what customers tell you and what actually drives value can be very different. So the example I always use is that Disney know that when they ask their customers what they want to eat at a theme park, Disney know people say they'd like to have an option of a salad. Disney also know that people don't eat salads when they go to theme parks. They eat hot dogs and hamburgers. Okay, so I've written 7 books on the subject of customer experience. So I find this ironic that I'm just about to say this to you, and that is, the irony is sometimes you shouldn't listen to your customers because they don't know what they want, or they're being affected by societal things and they can't necessarily articulate what they want. But what we know is that customers are driven by emotions. Okay, and therefore you've got to try to use different techniques to get under the skin of what the customer is telling you. It's just not as easy. And here's a mistake that organisations make. They talk about positive and negative emotions as if they're some type of bucket. Okay, and you've really got to get into the detail of, well, which emotion? So is it trust? Is it cared for? Is it valued? You've really got to get into that emotion to make it actionable and being able to do things about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've heard you use the term emotional signature for a brand too as well, because I've listened to your podcast. I think this whole arena, we spoke about this maybe a few years ago, but the whole arena has grown so significantly in terms of, when we first talked about it, maybe very few contact centers kind of use sentiment analysis tools, for example. Now they're kind of a big part of the contact center, and they don't only kind of monitor kind of whether emotions are positive or negative, as you say, but they go further. They take specific emotions as well, which people are thinking. So I think the whole arena is very fascinating. I think it's definitely something to look out for into the future. But kind of just want to bring this back now. Obviously, you wrote the white paper that we've discussed so far with a video solutions provider, which is Stream, and obviously they have kind of a big message going on about video as this enabler of a memory driven customer experience. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about how video can supplement this approach to customer experience?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think here's the interesting thing. Why are we doing this? Okay, why are we doing this over video? Why is it not just audio? Well, the reason we're using video is it's far more personal. And you can tell by the way that I'm using my hands all the time that, everything's so much more visual and you can put so much more expression into things. Back in the day, I used to run call centres for one of the telecoms providers. And I would have loved to have had video there. Now, so why video? Well, first of all, it's just a lot more personal. I mean, just again, if you're the listener now, if you're watching this, just think to yourself, well, if this was audio, the danger is you're going to get distracted by things. This feels a lot more that we're speaking to you, the individual. So it's a lot more connection now. I mean, I split my time between the UK and America, and consequently, I'm talking to my family, my kids, all the time over FaceTime, and the connection between that, now that we can do that, 20 years ago, you used to just have to make a 3-minute phone call because that's all you could afford. But the connection, that relationship is much deeper because you can see somebody. So that's the first piece of sort of psychology. You can absolutely use video to build that more personal relationship. And if I go back into my past, then we were in the business-to-business environment, particularly in business-to-business. If you're talking to somebody on a regular basis, you can build up a much better relationship with them. And, that then ties back into we know that communication is not just audio. I think they talk about something like 70% of communications being not audio, okay? So here's the thing. If you're an employee at the other end, you can start to see how the customer is feeling, okay? So it's not just based upon a voice call, but you can see whether the customer is annoyed, whether they're happy, whether they're sad, etc. Now tie that back to the conversation we were just having. Now tie that back to identifying where the peak is, identifying how the customer is feeling, and being able to do something about it. Clearly, using video, you can interpret how the customer is feeling and do those and build that peak end rule, and therefore that memory in a much greater degree. A couple of other areas that I would throw in. One that I think is a bit underestimated, and that is just the employee experience. So the employee not just having a constant stream of phone calls, but being able to see the customer, I think makes it better for the employee. And two other examples I would then give you using video from a more practical perspective. And again, this is my personal experience, and if I was running a business today, this is what I would be looking at. So one is, I find it very difficult sometimes, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, to explain what the problem is I'm having. So let me give you an example. I was recently getting a camera installed in my car. So a front-facing camera and a back-facing camera, for accidents and stuff like that. And I was trying to talk to the person at the other end and explain to them that I've got a SUV which has got, a hatchback, and therefore would the cable, if this is the front of the car, would the cable be hidden? And then when it goes into the hatchback, how is the cable hidden? Because I didn't want the cable running down. Now, just look at what I'm doing here, right? I'm literally showing you what the problem is, all right? Imagine if I was now taking this out and physically showing you my car and going that this is what the problem is. Now imagine that I'm just doing this over audio, okay? It's a lot more difficult. So the point I'm trying to make is this: by being able to, the customer being able to articulate and show the company the problem that they've got, it's a lot easier for them to deal with that complaint efficiently. And again, go back to the white paper, build a memory that is a good memory. And particularly, I would say now, because this is, in my view, this is in its infancy, okay? And I would see, just like FaceTime and everything else, again, I'm not sure about you, Charlie, but, whenever I phone anybody now, it's using FaceTime. I rarely phone people just having an audio call. The last thing I would come to is the reduction in costs. Okay, again, if I go back 20 years ago, we had a field force that was going out fixing faults. A customer would phone in, they would say the phone line's not working, and we would then send an engineer. the engineer would turn up on site and the engineer would have the wrong tools, or we sent the wrong type of engineer, and therefore we then had to send a different engineer. Again, being able to see what the problem is on that initial call, making sure and making the right diagnosis of what the problem is key in saving costs, because you can then either fix the problem, because actually all you need to do is press that red button there and that solves the problem, but because we didn't have video you couldn't see it before, or making sure you're sending the right engineer with the right tools to be able to do it. So all of those things for me combine together to go that video from a psychological perspective is a good idea. It builds memories, it builds relationship, and it's good for the organization from an employee perspective, and it's good for the organization from a cost saving perspective. So I think for all those reasons, video as we're using now is a great tool for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was lots of great use cases, as you mentioned there, and also to your point of how video can evoke certain emotions. It kind of reminds me of a trend that I've seen in finance. Of more finance companies are using video now, especially kind of stalwart banks, as they find it to be a very good tool for reassuring customers. And that's not, they're centralizing all of their human resource using video to kind of reassure them. And that's not something that digital disruptors do so much. So that's kind of a tool that they're using to almost stay ahead of niftier, more agile companies. So I think yeah, lots of really great examples there. But I think that's a great place to end today's chat. It's been really fascinating talking to you, Colin, as it always is. So thank you very much for joining us today.
No, great. It's been great being on the show. One of my favourite topics. So yeah, great to be on the show. And make sure you download the white paper and have a read.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'm sure. Again, I'll echo that statement about the white paper, and also check out your podcast, Colin, because I've also learned a lot from that too. But yeah, for now, thank you everybody for watching, and bye.